We'll be looking at Federalist number 73. It was written in March 21st, 1788. March 20th, 21st, which happens to be usually the first day of spring, is my favorite time of the year. So we'll honor that day on 1788 by looking at Federalist 73. The beauty of the system that they established in Philadelphia under this Constitution is the separation of powers and checks and balances. In this essay, which is one of the 11 essays that Hamilton covers the provisions that cover the presidency and defends these provisions, says we've done something very important. We have given the president a qualified veto. And we also have made it impossible for the Congress, the legislative branch, to adjust or mess with his salary while he's serving. Because if they hadn't done that, then the president would be a creature of the legislature. In other words, whatever the legislature would want him to do, he would have to do it because he'd be afraid that his salary will be reduced or anything that has to do with that. So they made sure in this Constitution that while the president is serving, they are not going to mess with his salary. They're not going to reduce it, and at the same time, they're not going to increase it. That is one important thing. The next thing they did is they gave the president a qualified veto. And again, it's very realistic, checks and balances. It says that, yes, in a Republican system, we know the legislature is going to have a lot of power. And we know that human beings, being ambitious, being with the fact that power can corrupt anybody in office, and also realizing that people, sometimes majority of people, 51%, 60% of people, might just think with their emotions, excuse me, let passions take over, as he repeatedly says here, and make the wrong call, tell their representatives to vote for something that is not in the long-term interest of the community, of the country. And that's where the president, if he or she is wise, come and say, no, I'm going to veto this if this bill comes to my desk. And the only way you can override this veto is if 2/3 of both chambers of Congress, 2/3 of the House of Representatives and 2/3 of the Senate, overrides it. Says, no, Mr. President, we represent 2/3 of the people, supposedly, and we're going to override your veto. We're going to negate your veto. So this idea is extremely important. And the fact that Hamilton is here and in different papers, the same thing James Madison, they repeatedly say people are good, but people with power, you cannot trust them. It's just human nature. Because of that, the system can work the way it does. Now, I've promised myself not to make any comments about what's going on right now in the United States, especially when we are going through these Federalist Papers. I do have a lot of commentary, but I'm going to keep it to myself. I'm just going to stick to maybe commenting a little bit on the lines of, a few lines of this paper and then read them for you. So if you ever think that I don't have any opinions of my own about this, it's just that I'd rather just stick to the reading of it, and then maybe in the future I'll share my opinions with people, and you will be part of the people. So let me go ahead and read this for you. The third ingredient towards constituting the vigor of the executive authority is an adequate provision for its support. It is evident that without proper attention to this article, the separation of the executive from the legislative department would be merely nominal and nugatory. The legislature, with a discretionary power over the salary and emoluments of the chief magistrate, could render him as obsequious to their will, and they might think proper to make him. They might in most cases either reduce him by famine or tempt him by largesse. So they can either cut down his salary and bring him to his knees, or promise him more money so that the president will go along with them. So it's either way, it's corrupting. It's a really bad deal. They might, in most cases, reduce him by famine or tempt him by largesse to surrender at discretion his judgment to their inclinations. These expressions take in all the latitude of the terms, would no doubt convey more than is intended. There are men who could neither be distressed nor won into a sacrifice of their duty. But this stern virtue is the growth of few soils. Even though we know there are few men who won't be tempted or who won't be scared, but he's being realistic. This stern virtue is the growth of few soils. This thing doesn't come around that often in any country. And in the main, it will be found that a power over man's support is a power over his will. If it were necessary to confirm so plain a truth by facts, examples would not be wanting, even in this country, of the intimidation or seduction of the executive by the terrors or allurements of the pecuniary arrangements of the legislative body. It says all we need to do is check out state legislatures and their history in the past and how everything is worked out. We'll see plenty of examples that how the fact that the legislature has controlled the flow of money has damaged the working of the government because they have tempted the governors or they have taken money away from the governors and all of that. He says, we've seen it here in this 13 states, 13 new states, how this has happened. I'm trying to see if I have enough time. Yes. For the next paragraph, it's not easy, therefore, to commend too highly the judicious attention which has been paid to this subject in the proposed Constitution. It is there provided that, now he's going to quote from the Constitution, the President of the United States shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased or diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emoluments from the United States or any of them. It is impossible to imagine any provision which would have been more eligible than this. The legislature, on the appointment of a president, is once for all to declare what shall be the compensation of his services by a new election commences. They can neither weaken his fortitude by operating upon his necessities, nor corrupt his integrity by appealing to his avarice. Neither the Union nor any of its members will be at liberty to give, nor will he be at liberty to receive any other emoluments than that which may have been determined by the first act. He can, of course, have no pecuniary inducements to renounce or desert the independence intended for him by the Constitution. So when he is not, his salary is not diminished or increased by the legislature while he's serving, while he's in office, that's one way that we can check and stop corruption. That's one thing, and number two, it's another way for us to make sure that he doesn't become the tool of the legislature. And he says we've seen plenty of examples all around the country in all the 13 states, and we have to learn from it. Now, in 2017, soon to be 2018, when I say country, I say the United States, and you immediately get that. But back then, when you read the texts, a lot of these people, when they said their country, they were talking about their states. So keep that in mind. It's extremely important. Back then, their imagination as far as the country went was their states. And that's why for the longest time, till actually the Civil War, they used to say United States are instead of United States is, all the way to the Civil War. So make sure that you, if you can, not only watch the videos that I've recommended over this past few videos, over these the reading of these Federalists. Also look at the books that I recommended yesterday, if you have time and you can access them, or you want to study the Federalist Papers a little bit more in depth. And the reason I actually sit in front of the camera is because I want to remind you or encourage you, especially if you're going through the Federalist Papers the first time, maybe even the second time, to make sure that you're looking at the text. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to understand the whole concept.